President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Thursday night hosted the two principal actors in the long-running political crisis, which led to the imposition of a state of emergency on Rivers State. Apparently, the meeting produced a positive outcome, given that both Minister of Federal Capital Territory, Yusuf, and his political rival and suspended governor, Simi Fubara, emerged from the session wearing a conciliatory position. Over the weekend, we have seen both of them at an event in Obio Akpo, namely the burial of the uncle of Yusuf, saying it was time to bury the ashes and work for the greater good of the people. Now, President Bola Tinubu also last Thursday signed into law 4 tax reform bills, declaring that it signals Nigeria's readiness for modern economic growth and international investment. Following President Tinubu's assent to the tax reform bills, key revenue-generating agencies, including the Nigerian Customs Service, Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, and several ministries and agencies who may lose their tax collection mandates. The development, which establishes the Nigerian Revenue Service, has now, the 4 tax bills have been signed. And I have with me, as first guest on this program, Dr. Muda Yusuf of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise and the former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to discuss some of these issues that have happened within the economy. Good to see you again, Dr. Muda Yusuf, and thank you for joining us. And thank you for being always faithful. Now, let's start with the 4 tax bills.
Thank you, Dr. Abati.
Yeah, Dr. Muda Yusuf, the 4 tax bills, Joint Administration Tax Bills, Revenue Service Tax Bill, Nigerian Tax Bill, and all of those. Required expectation is that these bills will provide a framework for taxation in Nigeria. Now, the Nigerian Tax Council or Association, they said they are happy. NECA, Nigerian Employers Consultative Council, speaking through Mr. Smart Uyerinde, they say they are very happy that this is a good development. Zach Adedeji, who is the head of the FIRS, that is going to benefit from the Nigeria Revenue Service Bill, creating a uniform agency to overlook tax administration in Nigeria, says, in fact, this is a very good development. Oyedele himself, who is the chairman of the Tax Reform and Fiscal Policy Committee, says that this is a major game changer. President Tinubu also says that with regard to tax administration in Nigeria, this is a step forward. Now, you have been with Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You are now promoting enterprises in Nigeria. What do you and your agency think?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati. I would like to align myself with those commentaries that you alluded to. This, for me, is a game changer. For a very long time, we haven't had the privilege of such a fundamental transformative reform in our tax administration. As I speak to you, before the enactment of these laws, we have several obsolete laws concerning tax, some of them dating back to maybe 30, 40, 50 years. We have challenges around multiplicity of taxes and levies. We We have all manner of leakages in the tax system. We have all manner of tax evasion and sometimes uncoordinated revenue collection. So if you look at all of this, and given the very strategic position of tax in the development of an economy and of a country, I think it's a welcome development that a major step has been taken to fix all the lapses, that exist in our tax administration. That is not to say that this is a perfect legislation. Because like in all legislations, until you begin to implement, that is when you begin to see lapses here and there. But I think generally, it's a very good reform. We need to give it a chance, and we must also be prepared to fine-tune it, to tweak it as we progress. In my view, there are quite a number of some fundamental effects it will have on the economy. First is the welfare effect. Because in this legislation, we are seeing that the threshold for the low-income earners in terms of tax exemption has been further expanded. The threshold for tax exemption, particularly VAT and company income tax for small businesses, have been expanded. We are likely to see, from what we have been told, better use of technology, minimizing tax evasion, which will have some good revenue effects. And once government is able to have more revenue, we are likely to see, or we expect to see, a much better impact of the increase in revenue on the lives of the people. As we speak now, we have challenges, for instance, with our capital budget implementation. Just as all of us have heard, we are now seeing an extension of the implementation of the capital budget of 2024 till the end of the year. These are all reflections of revenue shortfalls. And you don't have the revenue, there's no way you can effectively implement a budget. So from a revenue effect point of view, I think this is also a very good development. It's also good for investment because you have better clarity and you have some also good incentives in some sectors, sector like agriculture, like pharmaceutical, even oil and gas, to incentivize a lot more investment in the economy. So from the investment point of view, from the welfare point of view, and from the revenue point of view, I think this is very positive. But now the conversation is still at a theoretical level. When we now move to the implementation phase, I think that is when we now begin to see how effective this will be. But generally, I think this is a very good development.
Okay.
But we also need to worry as we progress with the reform about, how we onboard the informal sector of the economy. Because all these presentations that I've been hearing. Yes, over to you, Dr. Abbas.
Dr. Yusuf, I get your point. Even Taiwo Yedele himself said the next stage now is implementation. The taste of the pudding is in the eating, more or less, he said. So I get your point about implementation. But one point that was stressed by Taiwo Yedele is the point that poor people are going to benefit more from this new tax bill if you earn less than 250 million, and that there will be no VAT on health, education, and, basic things, food that people enjoy, and that nobody should pay VAT. Now, is there a regime, a mechanism in place to make sure that when we go to restaurants, nobody will ask us to pay VAT? Is there, from your own reading of the 4 tax bills, a mechanism in place that will ensure that local government will no longer stop us when we are moving from one local government to the other and ask for tax? Because, as Oyedele himself said, implementation is key. Do you, as somebody involved in the issue of defending the interests of consumers, see that there are guarantees to ensure that when I go to a restaurant to go and eat, they will not charge me VAT because I have a right to eat, which is one of the things that President Tinubu is trying to protect.
Yes, I think from what we have heard so far, there are some elements or some components of this legislation that are very easy to implement. And one of them is this issue of VAT on things that relate to pharmaceutical products, that relate to food, agricultural products, and so on. But when we talk of food, I think we also need some clarification whether eating in a restaurant will be covered in this. Because you talk about agriculture and food, whether we are talking about food processing companies, flour, bread, and so on, whether that will extend to eating in restaurants, I think we expect to see more of these details in a regulation, because the chairman of the committee has said that there is now going to be a regulatory framework. So the regulation will throw more light into how exactly these things will be implemented. Concerning the issue of the nuisance taxes, I'm talking about all these people who barricade the road, who put nails on the road, and all of them. Now, even for many of them, they are operating illegally. Several times in the last few years, many of these people have been declared illegal. They have been ordered to leave the road, but there has been no enforcement. And it has been very difficult to enforce this. Because you imagine you are in the middle of nowhere in one bush, and some people imagine they come in some reflective jackets and say that you have to pay X, Y, Z. Who are you going to appeal to at that point? And sometimes even they have support of the security agencies. Sometimes it's policemen with them, helping them to enforce some of these illegalities. So these are going to be very, very challenging things, because some of the because it's also a constitutional thing. Some of them even have the backing of their local government, and if you look at the constitution, they have rights over some of these taxes. So what they are hoping for is that, and that is what the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Tax has told us, that they are working in concert with the Nigeria Governors Forum. So we hope that the governors are on board to ensure that, all these issues of multiple taxes, people in the markets, on the road, and all of that are taken out of the road. But I can tell you that is going to be a tall order, because some of these things are easier said than done. But the spirit of it is good, but we wait to see how this will be implemented in the market, because we are talking about people who apply brute force on people. And I've seen instances where they do these things and the police are just watching them. Sometimes even some of the security people are even beneficiaries of some of these things. So these are fundamental issues around governance at the state level, at the local government level, that we hope that this legislation and the consensus that we have been told exists between the governors and the federal government on this matter, we are hoping that something concrete will come out of that.
Well, something concrete has already come out of the entire process. We now have the Nigeria Revenue Service Act, which says that there is harmonization at the level of tax collection. There is a review of the tax revenue architecture. We will now have a Nigeria Revenue Service replacing the Federal Internal Revenue Service to coordinate tax collection, state, local, federal. Now, Zach Oyedele, who is the chairperson of the FIRS, is saying that this will take effect by January 2026. How significant is this harmonization of collection? And that's on the back of the heels of your point about local government collecting tax and all that. How significant is this harmonization?
No, these are very significant developments, because one of the challenges that we have had in tax administration has been the fact that there has been no proper coordination, that we have seen several agencies of government operating different accounts and all of that. That has made the system to be a lot vulnerable to leakages and to corruption. So this approach of harmonizing, theoretically, I think is an excellent thing. But practically, we wait to see how it will work out. Again, this is about the regulatory framework that we expect to see from government. Because for many of these institutions, I mean, take the customs, for instance, take NIMASA, take Nigerian Port Authority, Civil Aviation Authority, NNPC. There are so many of them like that. These are institutions that have statutory powers based on the act that sets them up, that allows them to collect. Well, from this legislation, I think most of those powers have been most of those legislations have been dropped, from our statute as a result of this tax reform. So, first of all, we need to see how this will pan out. Well, perhaps with the use of technology, it will be easy to, ensure that those revenues, come directly to government. I mean, that will be a good thing. But again, there are technical issues as to how, to evaluate the revenues, to issue the invoice and all of that. Because, for instance, I don't know how a Nigerian Revenue Service official will understand issues of valuation, issues of HS code and all of that within the customs service, or how to understand what is happening in the aviation sector concerning regulatory fees and things concerning the Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority, or how to understand what is happening in NIMASA, in terms of maritime. These are technical areas that require some technical competencies. So perhaps these agencies will still have to do their technical work, but when it comes to issue of payment, which I think should be easy, maybe the payment will go directly. Again, the devil is in the details. Let's see how this pans out. But the good thing that I expect to see from this in terms of outcome is that it will reduce leakages and it will help to capture, the revenues properly. But once that is done, there's also the issue of how do you fund these organizations? Because we know what it is when revenues get into government coffers, and when it comes to releasing the revenues to fund these organizations, it becomes a very big issue. That has been a major issue also in our budgetary and fiscal administration processes, the issue of budget releases. Because if you look at our budgets year in, year out, it is one thing to have the appropriation, it is another thing to have the releases. And sometimes there are huge disparities between what is appropriated and what is eventually released. So these are some guarantee as we progress so that we don't cripple some of these very strategic institutions, going forward.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf, you recall that these 4 bills were very controversial. Some of the state governors kicked against it, and there were further consultations and all of that. In the course of it, Taiwo Yedele, chairman of the revenue, not revenue, they say tax policy, fiscal policy committee, said their objective is not about revenue, it's about equity, fairness, and justice. And since the bills have been passed and assented to, we have been hearing that, this is not about revenue collection, this is about justice, fairness, and equity. How much of fairness, equity, and justice is involved in this? Because some analysts have said that Nigeria collects very low revenue on tax. and that the African average is about 18%, whereas we collect between 10 to 15%, and we have been told that SMEs will benefit. How does this loss, how do these laws, that's proper English, how do these four laws, how do they serve the interests of the ordinary man? Because there's been a lot of talk about, oh, SMEs will benefit. In your opinion, as a man promoting, small and medium-scale enterprises, how do these laws serve our interests?
Well, in many ways, actually. First, there's the issue of the threshold, for low-income earners, which has been expanded, to 100,000 or 150,000 or so. By the time we see the final figures, but it has been significantly expanded in terms of personal income tax. Secondly, is the threshold for exemption for small businesses for the payment of VAT, payment of company tax. I think that again has been expanded to about 100 million. Some people are saying it's 150 million again. When we see the final draft, we will know. But that is a significant, expansion in terms of threshold of exemption as well. The third point is that some critical items on which the ordinary people spend a whole lot of their money or their budget, like food items, like pharmaceutical products, like educational materials, like public transportation. I think those things have also been exempted one way or the other, either in terms of VAT or in terms of company tax or both. So if you look at all of those, it has a significant welfare effect. Even though we also need to, not overstate it, because if you look at the number of Nigerians that are in paid employment, they are not so significant. Because when we talk of payee, I'm not sure that they're up to 5%. Many others are completely outside the structured, formal system of the economy. But if you look at it from all of those things, I think it's something that is beneficial to the ordinary people. Then the revenue effect also potentially has an impact. Because if the government has more revenue, because you said that this is not about revenue, of course it's about revenue. It's about optimizing revenue. It's not about increasing tax.
No, I was quoting
in
them.
addition to what
I was quoting
we
them.
expect to see about.
I was quoting them.
Yes, I know. I've heard Tawe Dele say that several times. It's also about optimizing revenue. Because if you have a revenue system there's a lot of leakages, tax evasion, and all of that inefficiency, of course, if you introduce this kind of reform, it will help to improve revenue performance. And when you have better revenue performance, it places the government in a much better position to deliver value to the citizens, especially if these monies are spent properly, judiciously, in a way that will impact the lives of the ordinary people. Because the capacity to invest in infrastructure, for instance, capacity to support education, to support health, to support road construction, to support power sector, depends on the revenue available.
Okay.
Because so far, our capital budget performance has not been impressive.
Okay, Doctor.
And it's because of the huge disparity between projected revenue and projected expenditure.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf.
So in all of these ways, I think it will be beneficial, yes.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf. The other issue is about awareness and trust. Do you think that enough effort has been made to ensure that the Nigerian people are aware of this and that enough trust has been created? Because originally, the basic issue was about trust. That was why governors kicked, roadside commentators, President Tinubu calls them bystanders, and busybodies, also complained about this particular, set of bills. Do you think that enough effort has been made in that direction and that there is significant buy-in? What do you think?
Well, I I think there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done, because part of the challenges at the beginning was this issue of trust. And but that was even among the critical stakeholders involved in the process, particularly those in the political space. No sufficient sensitization yet for the citizens, which I think is very important. I know that the chairman of the committee had several meetings and sensitization with some critical sectors of the economy. But most of these are still at the elitist level. So at this point, I think we need to also begin to sensitize the generality of the citizens. And I think the National Orientation Agency needs to support this whole agenda of the tax reform. But more importantly, it will sensitize our informal sector. Because the informal sector accounts for close to 50% of our GDP. Most of the investors in the agricultural sector are in the informal sector. Most of our investors in the distributive trade are in the informal sector. These people, they don't have audited accounts. They don't have tax advisors. They don't have anything to show you that this is profit, this is cost, this is my liability. And they're a very strategic part of this economy. So as we progress with the implementation, we need to be very careful so that we don't relate with them with any form of arbitrariness. I say arbitrariness because there was a time in the past, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when the FRS would just go, ask the banks for all the account transactions. Once they see a very big transaction in your account, they will slam you with a tax. That if you have so much, then you should be paying so much in terms of tax liability. I think that's a very simplistic way of doing things. So we need to be very careful in the way we use the data that we get, so that in the process of trying to solve one problem, we don't create another problem. Because when you see a huge transaction in a particular bank, it's not an indication of profitability. It's not an indication that the business is doing well. So we need to have a very good system that relates especially to the informal sector. Imagine a woman selling textile in Okeani or in Balogun, or somebody selling spare parts in Oladipo market or Lawansin or Inisha market, or even those selling cattle. These people have huge turnover. How do you separate what is their liability, what is their profit, to determine what kind of tax you are going to impose on them? So we have to be very creative in dealing with this segment of our economy. So these are some of the things that we should spend, the next few months that we have before implementation commences to educate Yusuf, the people and to come up with a framework that will not be disruptive.
Dr. Yusuf, final question about the budget.
Yes.
You are in the finance sector, so you know about these things. They say they have extended the validity of the 2024-2025 budget till December. Specifically, 2024 budget. This is the middle of 2025. Why do we have this, heart attack, this discrepancy, this is the second time they are extending 2024 budget. They did it in December. They are doing it now in June 2025. Why do we have to keep extending budget cycle when the point had been made that one of the things that the Nigerian government has been able to do is to keep to the normal cycle? The Tinubu administration is unable to keep to the budget cycle. Why?
Well, first of all, I think the spirit of ensuring that you have full implementation of those capital items in the 2024 budget, which necessitated the rolling over till the end of the year, I think we must appreciate that. Rather than drop them completely, it has been extended so that those things will be done before the end of the year. But I think the fundamental issue to worry about is the mismatch between revenue and expenditure. What I've noticed is that most of these things, though provided in the budget, we did not have the revenue to execute them. And when you have this kind of mismatch, it creates a whole lot of problem in fiscal operations. It creates a whole lot of problem in terms of what to do and what not to do. So much that some agencies of government begin to feel very bad. That if you are not strong enough, you will not have your own projects, to be executed. These are the problems you have when there is a very serious mismatch between revenue and expenditure. So what I think has happened is that looking at the numbers and looking at the statement from NNPC and from FAC, the expected revenue from oil sector, particularly NNPC, did not quite come in 2024. I think the revenue performance was just about 50%. And on top of that, we have had a lot of forward sales of the crude, to borrow, to fund the return around maintenance, to do all sorts of things. So the revenue assumption from the oil sector practically collapsed. So that is what I think has been responsible for this shortfall in revenue, which had affected the implementation of the capital budget. Now that the president has kind of, reviewed and reformed the NNPC in some ways and put some more competent people in that space, we expect that this kind of failure to remit and this kind of expenditure and collapse of revenue assumptions will not happen again. Because that was a major issue. If you have 50% revenue performance from a major revenue source, there's no way it will not affect budget implementation.
Okay.
Because if you look at the non-oil exports or non-oil sector segments of revenue, we surpassed our expectation. We surpassed the budget.
Okay, Dr.
From
Yusuf.
VAT, from customs, from company income tax, and all of that.
Dr. Yusuf, whether it's budget or it's tax laws, I want you to comment briefly, because we need to move on the issue of productivity. If there's no productivity in the economy, who is going to pay tax? Productivity, is it not important? Are we at the expected level of productivity in this economy?
Well, productivity is very important. And related to that is also the issue of transparency in the use of these revenues. Because if you pay the tax and there's no evidence that these monies are being spent properly in a transparent manner, of course it's an issue. So there's the issue of the transparency, how equitable are we spending the money? And there's also the issue of spending in a way to support productivity. Productivity is a function of the environment. It's a function of the infrastructure that we create. How much of our budget is being channeled towards some of these critical enablers for productivity? I think we need to tweak it. We are spending too much on recurrent. We need to spend a lot more on infrastructure, not just on capital budget, on infrastructure. Now, if you look at budget performance, year in, year out, the non-performance has always been with the capital component of the budget. That story needs to change. And that is the way we can have a more significant impact on productivity. Productivity is about the power sector. It's about logistics. It's about the rail system. It's about telecommunication infrastructure. It's also even about institutions. The quality of our institution, the quality of our bureaucracy, the quality of our judicial system. The quality of institutions also matter in productivity, so that institutions don't constitute obstacles to those who are investing. So these are the dimensions of productivity that we should address. And we should also focus on ensuring that the reforms, whether it is tax reform, fiscal reforms, also addresses these critical enablers of productivity in the economy.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, for joining us on This Day Live.